My name is Johanna Delacroix, 32 years old. The ballroom glittered like a jewelry box spilled open. Crystal chandeliers dripping light, white roses wound in silver vases, strings of fairy bulbs floating like stars. Every clink of glass, every laugh, every flourish of music felt rehearsed, as if the whole event were a stage play written not for love, but for spectacle. My parents had been boasting for months about this wedding. They said it would be the crown jewel of our family history. But as I stood by the entrance, clutching my daughter's small hand, I understood what it really was: a parade. A parade to prove they belonged in wealthier circles, that their son's marriage was their ticket into a shinier life. Ella, 6 years old and wide-eyed, twirled in her pale pink dress, pointing out every detail. "Mama, look at the cake, the flowers, the sparkly lights." Her joy was so pure, so unfiltered, that for a fleeting second I allowed myself to believe she might actually experience magic here. I smiled, brushing a loose curl from her cheek, whispering, "Yes, baby, it's beautiful." The ushers began to seat guests. Every chair had a cream-colored card resting elegantly on the plate. I wasn't paying close attention. I wish I had. Ella, eager to play the grown-up, skipped ahead of me, her dress swishing. She gasped in delight when she saw her name card waiting like the adults. "Look, Mama," she cried, climbing into her chair, bouncing with pride. "There's writing on mine." My stomach tightened. She was still new to reading, slow but determined. She held the card up high, lips moving. The guests nearby glanced over with indulgent smiles, expecting a child's innocent triumph. Instead, her small voice broke the hum of conversation. "Fake, daughter?" The words dropped like a stone into still water. First confusion clouded her face, then recognition, then collapse. Her proud grin vanished. Her shoulders folded in, her eyes filled, and the sparkle in them dimmed as though someone had blown out a candle. A silence spread across the table, a silence sharp enough to sting. I heard someone's fork scrape against porcelain, then nothing at all. "Oh, for heaven's sake," my mother said with a brittle laugh. "We didn't think she could read yet. It was just a joke." A joke. Andrew, my brother, leaned back in his chair, smirk curling. "Technically, it's true. She's not really your daughter." I froze, my blood pounding in my ears. Ella sat rigid, clutching the card like a verdict. Her lip trembled, her gaze darting to me, pleading for an explanation. I pulled her into my lap, her little body stiff with shame. My voice could have cracked into fury, but I forced it cold instead. "We're leaving," I said. "Don't overreact," my father muttered, eyes flicking toward the nearest table. "It was supposed to be funny." Andrew chuckled. "Always so dramatic, Johanna." I stood, heels echoing against the marble floor, each click louder than the last. I didn't scream, didn't flip a table. I would not give them the scene they craved. Elizabeth, the bride, rose halfway from her seat, concern flickering across her face. She leaned near the aisle just enough for me to hear her whisper, "I didn't know." I didn't slow my steps. "I believe you," I said quietly, tightening my grip on Ella, "but we don't feel welcome here." And with that, I walked out. Outside, the cool night air bit at my skin. Ella buried her face in my shoulder, small gasps rattling her chest. I promised her ice cream, not because ice cream fixes cruelty, but because sometimes sprinkles and sugar are all the weapons you have. We found a late-night cafe, bright and loud, with children smearing chocolate on their cheeks, and parents too tired to care. I sat her at a booth, ordered a sundae piled with cream and cherries. She didn't touch it. She sat stiff, hands folded like she was in church. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes far too old for her years. "You're not really my mama, are you?" The words sliced me open. I steadied my voice, even as my insides twisted. "Why would you say that, baby?" Her chin wobbled. "Because the card said fake, and you didn't—" She trailed off, lost in the tangle of feelings she couldn't name. I leaned forward, took her tiny hand. "Ella, listen to me. Some children grow in their mama's tummy. Some come later, through adoption, or because love made a family in a different way. But do you know what really makes someone a mama?" Her wet eyes blinked at me. "Love," I said. "Love makes a mama, and I love you more than anything in this world. You are my daughter, in every way that matters, always." Her lip trembled harder. "But they said, you'll give me back." I almost choked. "Give you back? Never. Not in a million years. You are mine, and I am yours. No one, No one can take that away. She let out a sob and launched herself across the booth into my lap, knocking the spoon to the floor. Promise, promise, she whispered into my neck. Forever, I murmured into her curls, rocking her as the noise of the cafe faded away. For 5 minutes, there was only us. Then my phone began to buzz. At first, I ignored it, but it buzzed again and again. When I finally pulled it out, the screen glowed with missed calls. Mom, Dad, Andrew. Dozens already. The phone rattled against the plastic table as more calls rolled in. Other parents in the cafe glanced at me curiously. I plastered on a polite smile, the kind that warned, mind your business. Ella, still curled in my lap, glanced at the phone and then away, as if even she sensed the storm wasn't over. I flipped the phone face down, trying to give us a pocket of peace. She picked up her spoon, scooped a bite of melting ice cream, and said softly, "Sprinkles are the best part, Mama." I smiled, though my throat ached. Yes, baby, they are. But inside, dread coiled like a snake, because I knew my family, and this was only the beginning. I used to think my childhood was ordinary, because when you're the firstborn, you don't know another script exists. You mistake routine for love and predictability for safety. Then Andrew arrived, and the house rearranged itself around him like furniture pushed to the walls to make space for a new center. People said I was jealous. That word tossed at me like a diagnosis. Of course she's acting out. But I wasn't acting out. I was taking notes. I watched my father, the man who never had time to toss a ball with me, suddenly discover entire afternoons for catch in the backyard. I watched my mother glow over noises Andrew made that were indistinguishable from any baby's, as if each burble were a credential. "He's going to be someone," she would say, her voice warm with prophecy. If I brought home a drawing, she'd smile and put it on the fridge for a day, maybe 2. If Andrew scribbled a thundercloud of crayon, it became precocious. There was a day in 3rd grade when I won a small district writing award. Dad patted my shoulder, absent, perfunctory, and told me to go change because Andrew's T-ball banquet started in an hour. "It'll be fun," he said, already preoccupied with where they'd sit so he'd be seen by the right parents. At the banquet, Andrew received a participation ribbon, and my father clapped so loudly his palms flushed red. I learned something I've never been able to unlearn. Sometimes the prize is not the prize. Sometimes the spotlight is worth more than the win. I adapted. I became useful, quiet, the one who could be counted on to set the table, to remember the spare keys, to pick up the dry cleaning, to do the work of keeping a house humming without drawing attention to myself. "You're a good girl," my mother said while scanning a guest list for her charity luncheon. There was never malice in her tone, just something colder, indifference dressed in politeness. By college, I had a minor talent for disappearing. I needed money, and I liked children, so I took extra babysitting shifts, families who wanted Saturday nights and Tuesdays after school and the occasional emergency pickup. That's how I met Michael. He wasn't polished or theatrical. He was steady, late 20s, sleeves rolled, eyes with that permanent shadow that fathers get when they're doing it alone. His daughter, Ella, was wobbling out of diapers. Her mother had drifted through courtrooms and broken promises until the custody orders were no longer a question. "It's not glamorous," Michael said during our first interview, straightening a stack of unpaid bills with embarrassed care. "I'm a warehouse supervisor. Shifts run over. I try to be everywhere at once. That's a lie, of course." He cracked a smile, soft and self-deprecating. "No one can be everywhere at once." I shouldn't have liked him. On paper, he was not the man my parents imagined for me. In truth, he wasn't a man they'd have imagined at all. But there are people whose kindness doesn't need a speech. It shows up in small, exact ways. A clean cup for you on the counter, a note on the fridge that says he'll be late, but there's pasta and the good Parmesan is on the top shelf. The job began as hours logged in, exchanged for cash, and became, piece by piece, a life. Ella would toddle toward me when I arrived, arms lifted like a command. She told me Babel stories that only we understood, a cracked-lit mythology of nap times and favorite cups and monsters under the couch that turned out to be dust bunnies with ambitions. I still remember the first night she woke screaming. Michael had left for a double shift. The apartment was all creaks, and the hiss of the building's old pipes. I rushed in to find her standing in the crib, sweaty and bewildered. "Where's my mommy?" she asked in a small, matter-of-fact voice, more curious than heartbroken, as if simply checking inventory. "I'm here," I said. Not an answer so much as a promise. I tucked her against my chest and drew circles on her back until her breathing synced to mine. She fell asleep with a fist tangled in my sweater like an anchor. Something shifted in me that night, something that wasn't dramatic but felt seismic. It wasn't only affection, it was responsibility, arriving without fanfare and settling in like it had always been there. With Michael, affection came the way spring does in a stubborn city, hesitant, then sudden. He didn't make big speeches, he showed up. He replaced the bent hinge on my mailbox without asking. He was the first person to look me in the eye after I'd finished speaking and ask follow-up questions. Not to keep me talking, but because he had listened. I fell in love, not in a fireworks burst, but in a series of quiet rooms where I was visible. The first time he kissed me, he tasted like coffee and rain. The day I told my parents about him, my mother stared as though I'd set a muddy shoe on a white sofa. "He's older and complicated," she said, the last word dipped in bleach. "This is not a good story for you." "It's my life, not a story," I replied. My father didn't bother with euphemism. "You're volunteering to raise another woman's child," he said. "That's a mistake you'll spend your youth correcting." When I didn't answer, he added, "This won't open any doors, Johanna." I remember laughing, a brittle, misfired sound. "I didn't pick him like an internship, Dad." When we married a few years later, it was small and inexpensive. Courthouse vows, Ella in a dress with star buttons, a grocery store bouquet that smelled like clean kitchens. Michael cried without caring who saw. I tried to and couldn't. My parents did not attend. They sent nothing, not even a card, and I told myself I didn't care, then discovered I did in a quiet, humiliating way I kept to myself. That night, we danced in our apartment to a playlist Michael cobbled together in 15 minutes. We laughed when the sink rattled along to the bass. He spun Ella on the kitchen tiles until she squealed. It felt like the cheapest celebration and the richest life. There are days the universe rehearses its tragedies with you. It lays down a thin first draft of loss before handing you the final script. A month before it happened, Ella had a new phase of questions about families. Who has which? Who lives where? And I began explaining adoption, talking about birth parents and forever parents in a way I thought she could digest. I didn't know I was foreshadowing the next version of our lives. The night the phone rang, rain battered the windows like it was trying to get in. I'd put Ella to bed. Her rabbit lay lopsided beside her. Michael was late from a shift. It wasn't unusual, but unease prickled, shapeless. When the call came, everything condensed, sound, light, time, into a single point I couldn't step around. Words like skid and impact and instant blew through the room and left the air thinner. After those words, there were others: officer, identification, I'm so sorry, and then a silence that hummed like the chandelier in my parents' hallway when I was a child, crystal trembling over polished floors. I hung up and walked to Ella's room on legs that didn't quite take orders. I watched her chest rise and fall. I sat on the rug with my back against the bed frame and tried, for a few minutes, to breathe like she did, in small, forgiving counts. The days that followed came as a stack of tasks. The body requires paperwork. Grief requires errands. Someone has to make calls and choose times and answer questions. People pressed my hands and said his name like it would stitch him back into the room. I barely remember the funeral, only the smell of coffee that never tasted like anything and how Ella's fingers found the hem of my coat and wouldn't let go. The first night after, she crawled into my lap and pressed her ear to my chest like she could hear the answer from the engine of my heart. "When's Daddy coming home?" she asked. There it was, the sentence you can't answer without breaking something necessary. I didn't give her any sentence. I just held her and let the clock argue with itself on the wall. She woke at 2, then at 4, asking smaller and smaller variations of the same question: when, where, why? And I kept offering the only thing I had in abundance: presence. I climbed into her bed and traced constellations on her shoulder blades with my fingertips until she slept. In the practical daylight, I set about protecting what I could. I made a list titled, "Keep Ella Safe." I called an attorney about the adoption paperwork that grief had pushed to the bottom of a drawer. I gathered school records and medical files. I told myself that adults who love children do hard things quickly. I told myself I could do this quickly. Then I stared at forms that asked for dates I didn't have and signatures I couldn't produce and found out that time can be both fast and sticky. I called my parents, not for money, not for advice I knew they wouldn't give, but for the simple kindness of grandparents with an afternoon to spare. I asked if they could take Ella to the park on Saturdays so I could work a second shift or cry in a bathroom where she couldn't hear me. My father didn't lower his newspaper. I could hear the dry slide of pages. "She's not really your daughter, Johanna," he said, the sentence so calm it felt rehearsed. "When are you giving her back?" "Back to who?" I asked, startled into a whisper. My mother's voice came from farther away, cool and precise. "Her mother is still out there. She'll surface. Best not to confuse the child." I hung up and stood in the kitchen, staring at a bottle of dish soap as if it might explain a world I no longer recognized. Outside, a neighbor's wind chimes made a sound like a question you don't want to answer. Inside, Ella hummed to herself in the living room, drawing. She looked up when I entered. "Mama, look," she said, proud and plain. She held up a picture, 3 stick figures holding hands. She'd labeled them carefully in a child's unsteady script: Daddy, Mama, me. I crossed the room and knelt until my eyes were level with hers. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it with a force that felt like a vow. I told myself I would anchor us to that simple drawing if the entire rest of the world insisted on calling it a lie. There is a variety of love that is not loud, but is relentless. It shows up at 2 a.m. and 5:30, and in school pickup lines and in the office of a weary clerk stamping forms. It shows up with soup and with steady breathing and with the refusal to abandon a child to anyone's story but the truth. I didn't have a map for the road ahead. I had pens, folders, and a promise. Sometimes that is enough to get you to morning. Grief has a way of slowing time, but the world around you doesn't pause. Bills still arrive. School bells still ring. People still expect answers you can't give. In those early months after Michael's death, I convinced myself my parents might soften. Surely, I thought, they'd step into the gap. They'd seen the wreckage. They had to. But the first time I asked them for help, they looked at me as if I were asking for something unreasonable. "She's not yours, Johanna," my father repeated, calmer this time, as if he were offering wisdom instead of cruelty. "It isn't right to raise another woman's child." I stared at him, waiting for some flicker of humanity, but he only adjusted his glasses and turned the page of his newspaper. My mother added, "It's time you faced reality. You can't keep living in a fantasy." A fantasy. That's what Ella was to them. Not a child, not my daughter, just a symbol of a mistake. I left their house that night with my arms shaking, Ella's hand clutched in mine like she might float away if I loosened my grip. At home, Ella had questions I couldn't answer. Her world had shrunk to me and her rabbit toy. She followed me from room to room, even the bathroom, her presence like a shadow that breathed. Some nights I explained adoption to her again, this time more carefully. Some children are born into one family and loved into another. She listened with her head tilted, small fingers wrapped around mine. I told her that love is what makes a family. But in the back of my mind, my parents' voices hissed like background static. Meanwhile, Andrew's engagement became the family's headline. My mother lived at bridal shops, her hands fluttering over fabric swatches like she was curating a museum exhibit. My father bragged at his golf club about the venue, the guest list, the money they were pouring in. The irony stung. When I'd married Michael, they claimed poverty. "We can't afford to help with a wedding," they had said. Now their checkbook opened as if by magic. Every dollar, another brick in the palace they were building for Andrew. I watched them from the periphery, invisible as ever. Every phone call with my mother revolved around catering decisions. Every dinner conversation with my father was about Andrew's future connections. Ella and I were barely footnotes. At night, after Ella fell asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with forms spread out. Guardianship, adoption petitions, legal jargon that blurred in the lamplight. My lawyer warned me that the biological mother still had theoretical rights. "It's complicated," he said. "We'll need to push this through carefully." Complicated, another word that didn't belong to a child's life, yet there it was, hovering like a storm cloud. One evening, while folding Ella's laundry, I caught her humming the tune from the wedding, one of the songs that had played before the disaster. My throat tightened. She was rehearsing a memory that had hurt her. I knelt beside her and asked, "Do you remember that day, baby?" She looked at me seriously. "They wrote fake, but you said love makes a mama." Her words were so simple, so sure, that for a heartbeat I believed we could outlast anything. But dread lingered. By spring, the wedding machinery was in full force. Invitations gilded with embossed lettering arrived in heavy envelopes. My parents called me, not to include me, but to assign me obligations. "You'll sit near the cousins," my mother dictated. "Make sure Ella is dressed properly." Not once did they ask how Ella was doing, if she was still waking in the night, if she still whispered for her father in the dark. I wanted to say no. I wanted to shield her, but part of me believed attending was necessary, as if showing up would prove that Ella belonged in our family despite their contempt. I told myself maybe it would be good for her to see celebration, to see lights and music and joy. Naive, maybe, but hope is stubborn. The week before the wedding, I had a dream that unsettled me. In it, Ella stood in the ballroom, holding a card in her hands. She read it aloud, but this time the word wasn't fake. It was gone. I woke up gasping, heart hammering. The dream clung to me like smoke. On the morning of the wedding, Ella twirled in her dress, delighted. "Do you think they'll have ice cream, Mama?" she asked, the memory of the cafe resurfacing. I forced a smile. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe." As we walked into the glittering hall, I felt my chest tighten. The chandeliers shimmered, the air smelled of roses and champagne, but beneath the glamour, I sensed a fault line. My family was obsessed with appearances, and appearances always crack. When the ushers began leading us to our seats, I felt that same prickle of unease I'd felt the night of Michael's accident, as if time was holding its breath. Ella skipped ahead, eager to find her place, her little shoes tapping against the marble floor. She gasped with delight when she spotted the card. I didn't know then how heavy that single piece of paper would be, how it would cut deeper than any blade. And in the silence before Ella read it, I swear I heard the universe whisper, "This is the moment." The moment we walked out of that ballroom, I thought maybe the worst was behind us. I was wrong. My phone didn't stop vibrating that night. Call after call, text after text. "What have you done? Answer us now. You ruined everything." At first, I ignored them. I tucked Ella into bed, smoothed her hair, whispered promises that tomorrow would be better. But the buzzing on the nightstand wouldn't quit. By morning, I had 57 missed calls and 32 unread messages. When I finally picked up, my mother's voice was shrill, panicked. "What did you tell her?" "Tell who?" My throat was dry. "The bride, Elizabeth. We saw you talking to her before you left." I remembered that brief whisper at the door. I didn't know. My reply, "I believe you." That was it. Nothing else. "I didn't tell her anything," I said slowly. "Don't lie to me, Johanna. She walked out. Do you understand? She left her own reception. Andrew is beside himself. His wife left him on his wedding day, and it's on you, all of it." Her words fell like stones. For a second, I couldn't breathe. "You can't seriously think—" But she had already hung up. The next morning, pounding rattled my front door so hard I feared the hinges would give way. I opened it to find Andrew, his face red, his tie hanging loose, eyes wild. He didn't say hello. "What did you tell her?" he barked, pushing past me into the living room. "Good morning to you, too," I muttered, shutting the door. He paced like a caged animal, his voice cracking. "Elizabeth is talking annulment. She says she can't live with lies. You ruined everything." I said nothing, Andrew. Nothing. "I saw you talking to her." 3 words, I shot back. "I believe you. That's it. If 3 words can break your marriage, maybe it wasn't built on much to begin with." His jaw clenched. He slammed his fist into the wall, leaving a dent. "Fix it." I laughed bitterly. "I'm not a plumber. Your marriage is your mess, not mine." His glare was venom. Then, without another word, he stormed out, the door shuddering in its frame. For days afterward, silence settled like a heavy fog. No calls, no knocks, just the waiting. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every unknown number on my phone sent my heart racing. Ella sensed it too. She clung to me even more, her drawings now crowded with anxious lines and dark colors. Then, one morning, the quiet shattered. A single text from my mother. "You won't get away with this. We'll make sure of it." I read it again and again, as if repetition might translate it into something else, but the message stayed the same, a threat. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I wanted to shield Ella from it, to keep her world small and safe. But dread burrowed under my skin. That evening, as I washed dishes, I glanced out the window and froze. A car I didn't recognize was parked across the street, engine off, lights dim. No one moved inside. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Finally, it drove away. Coincidence, I told myself. Just a neighbor's guest. But the unease stuck, like a splinter too deep to dig out. At bedtime, Ella asked me, "Why are you looking outside so much, Mama?" I forced a smile. "Just checking the weather, sweetheart." But as I tucked her in, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over. In fact, it hadn't even started. The knock came a week later. Not Andrew, not my parents. Worse. When I opened the door, a woman stood there. Early 30s, well-dressed, hair neatly tied back. She didn't look like the wreck I'd imagined from whispered family stories. She introduced herself, but I already knew who she was. Ella's biological mother. "I only found out recently," she said, her voice calm, almost apologetic. "About Michael. About Ella." She said my daughter's name like it belonged to her. My stomach dropped. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice tight. "Your parents contacted me," she said. "They told me she shouldn't be raised by a stranger. They said I should know what's going on." The ground seemed to tilt. My parents did this. Of course they had. They couldn't stand the thought of Ella being mine, so they'd gone digging in graves best left closed. "She's not a stranger," I said, my voice shaking. "She's my daughter." "You haven't adopted her. Not legally," she replied, careful, precise. "And if you don't let me see her, I'll take it to court." My chest seized. She wasn't wrong. The paperwork was unfinished, lost under grief and red tape. The thought of losing Ella made the walls of the house press in. "What do you want?" I whispered. "I want to see her." That night, I sat by Ella's bed, watching her chest rise and fall, her hand curled around her stuffed rabbit. I tried to imagine telling her she might have to meet the woman who left her behind. My lungs felt like they were filled with stone. The visit happened in my living room. Supervised. Controlled. Ella sat beside me, half hidden behind my arm, staring at the woman like she was a stranger on a bus. "What do you like to do?" the woman asked gently. "Draw," Ella said, her voice small. "Do you draw with—" "I draw with Mama," Ella cut her off, proud and fierce. Her little hand gripped mine, refusing to let go. She didn't relax until the visit ended, until she was back in my lap, pressed against me like a magnet snapping to its place. The woman's face was unreadable. "Thank you for letting me see her," she said quietly before leaving. Days passed. No calls, no letters. Then a message appeared on my phone. I talked to my husband. "I won't disrupt her life. If you want to adopt her, I'll sign the papers. But if she ever wants to know me when she's older, I'll be here." Relief hit so hard I had to sit down. My hands shook as I called my lawyer. Even miracles need paperwork. Months later, the adoption was finalized. Official. Permanent. I walked out of the courthouse with the papers pressed to my chest like treasure. Ella squeezed my hand, looked up at me, and whispered, "So it's really done?" "Yes, baby," I told her. "Forever." Her smile was small but certain, the kind of smile that tells you the ground beneath your feet is finally solid. Meanwhile, Andrew's marriage collapsed. Elizabeth left him, filing for divorce after discovering who he really was, how he smirked when Ella was humiliated at the wedding. She realized that was the man she'd married, and she wanted no part of it. Andrew lost everything: money, reputation, even the illusion of being the golden boy. My parents didn't fare better. After Elizabeth left, they had the audacity to demand her family repay the money spent on the wedding. Flowers, chairs, the reception hall. As if generosity came with an invoice. Elizabeth's family refused. "You wanted to show off," they said. "That's on you." Their grand investment in appearances bought them nothing but humiliation. The country club invitations dried up. Their bragging rights vanished. The empire they built on Andrew's back crumbled. They tried to destroy me. Instead, they destroyed themselves. And I gained everything. Ella is mine. Legally, permanently, without loopholes. No one can take her from me. When I look back now, I realize the wedding card that said fake daughter wasn't a curse. It was a revelation. A crack that showed me the truth. Family is not defined by blood or approval or appearances. It is defined by who stays, who fights, who loves without condition. So tell me, if it were you, would you have cut them off for good as I did? Or would you leave the door cracked, hoping they might one day change?